and welcome to Property Matters here on Dublin South FM. You can contact the show on Twitter, Facebook or LinkedIn at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. Your hosts for today are Brian Fox and myself, Carol Tallon. First up, I'm delighted to be joined by Paul McCourtney, President of IPAV. Paul, you're very welcome. We've spoken to your colleague, IPAV CEO Pat David, on many occasions, so I'm delighted to welcome you today and congratulations on your recent appointment in September to President.
Oh, thank you, Carol. It's great to be on the show and looking forward to the interview this afternoon. As I say, it's probably one of the first sort of live interviews that I've done since my presidency, and looking forward to the year ahead. I know it's, the past year with the outgoing President, Tom Cross, it was sort of very challenging and has been, I suppose, for everybody over the last 12 months. But I suppose a positive note, I mean, the market has held up resiliently well, and looking forward for my term in office until next July, I believe. So yeah, it's all
very good. Very good. Well, look, we're delighted you were able to join us today. And actually, I'm delighted that I got to see you in person. You're one of a handful of people in the industry I've gotten to see in person over the last almost 2 years. Yeah. IPAV hosted the 7th European Valuation Conference in Dublin last week, and it was an online event, but the speakers came together in a studio in Dublin. So the European Valuation Conference, that's a really big event to be hosted in Dublin, and I know IPAV partnered with Tagova. So you might just kind of talk us through the event and why it falls to IPAV to organise and run this.
Yeah, I mean, obviously IPAV is an awarding body now for Tagova for the Blue Book valuation. And, in recent years, it's come to the fore now with the Blue Book valuation reports being carried out for lending institutions. Over previous years, maybe going back 10, 15 years, the Red Book would have been, the noted book to go to for valuations. But IPAV is now seen as the awarding body for Ireland and for the Blue Book, which is recognised now as sort of the standard right across the European Union. So this conference and the last 6 conferences, they've been a vital part for IPAV members to further their education. It's a requirement now, if you're carrying out valuations for lending institutions in Ireland, that you must have a standard or a qualification of at least the Blue Book. So you can become a TRV for residential valuations, or the REV like myself, which I've got, is for the commercial valuations. So and with the Blue Book, they've just launched their latest edition. So there's ongoing improvements. They've now launched as well a business valuation section, which in my view is going to be very important going forward for valuers, because past it would have been going to the likes of accountancy firms that were valuing businesses. So now anybody that's further educating themselves up to this sort of standard will find that they'll be able to value businesses as well, not just assets, let's say the sale of properties or apartments or retail units. So it's all good, it's very positive going forward, and it's been brought to a standard now that's recognized throughout Europe and the wider world, I would have said.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, our introduction, I think, to Tagova was a number of years ago, when we interviewed one of your predecessors, Ella Dunphy. And, I know that she would have been instrumental in working towards establishing these standards. Now, for a professional body, how important are the European standards as opposed to just Irish standards?
Well, again, I suppose you have to look at it this way, Carol. It's like we're part of Europe. You've got, you have multinationals that are coming into Ireland, they're purchasing properties. You have investors from abroad that are purchasing property. So it's not just in Ireland. You've also got to recognise that the level of standards of this qualification for people that are working within the industry, if they decide to go and work abroad, they have that opportunity, because it's a recognised certification throughout the European Union, that if you've somebody that's worked in the industry in the commercial sector, let's say, and decides that they're going to move abroad, they have that opportunity to do so, because they'll have the skill set and the qualification to be able to take that with them. So it's recognised on throughout the European Union, and even if they're going to the United Kingdom, those qualifications will stand up there also. So, it's all good from the perspective, and it's the opportunity for individuals that they may be working in, let's say, in the residential sector for the last 15, 20 years, but they decide maybe to move into a different area within the industry, because it's not just about buying and selling property. There's many more facets to the actual industry yourself, as you'd know.
Yeah, well, do you know what? Now, I'm a bit of a one-trick pony, so of course I was thinking of valuations in the property context. So actually, it was really interesting at the conference to hear that, it's obviously much broader than that. But just, I suppose, to bring it to into the property context,
Yeah.
the conference on Friday was officially opened by our Housing Minister, Darragh O'Brien, and he spoke. He actually gave some great information and some great insights there into the maybe some of the plans on how to execute the Housing for All strategy, and the role that valuers and indeed the wider real estate industry will have to play on that, and also in terms of an introduction to the cost rental model, which of course is a new model here for Ireland. But one of the most important things I think this housing minister has done is that he seems to be listening to the industry. Would that be a fair assessment?
I think it would, Carol. And I mean, look, Pat Davitt and the executive within IPAV, we've made numerous proposals in recent budget submissions in regards to what's actually required to provide the housing for all. So there's been multifaceted inputs with regards to not just from IPAV, but industry sectors that have either a vested interest or they have an interest in actually providing solutions that will kickstart the road to getting housing for all, because it's a complicated subject, it's a complicated topic, and there's not one shoe that fits all. So there's multi levels within the property sector that needs to be brought to the table in order to be able to provide a solution. But I think the 200-page report that the minister and the government have put together, there's a lot of good information in there, and some of that has come from IPAV with regards to initiatives that need to be activated and put in place to get this going.
Well, Paul, one of the things that was particularly interesting on Friday's conference is that there were speakers from different jurisdictions. So, we started this conversation by talking about the need for standards and valuation, but of course, not all of these jurisdictions are coming are presenting at the same level in terms of data available. So, for example, a decade ago or a decade and a half ago, certainly Ireland could have been criticised for the lack of data, and of course it could be better. But actually, we've made huge leaps forward in terms of the property price register, and we have more information now for valuers, to base their valuations on. But is that a bit of a double-edged sword? Can there be an over-reliance on the data and maybe not enough on the context?
Well, I think there's probably two parts to that, Carol, because obviously, in the last, I would say probably several years, there's been a huge leap forward in the amount of data that's actually available in the marketplace. And, where you compare us to other European countries, I would say we're at the front end or the leading edge of that now, where we, as an industry sector, I suppose, we've embraced access to the use of data and how we actually use it. But there's another part to that. You've got to look at, when you're drilling down, let's say, into a local or micro level, it's the agents on the ground that really give you the feel or the input of what's actually happening within a sector. And, whether that's residential or whether that's commercial. Now, obviously, I think with commercial, you'll have the larger real estate bodies that have their own data in-house, which isn't necessarily available out in the public domain or in the wider domain. Whereas the residential with the property price register and the CSO figures and various other figures coming into, I suppose, like a data pool. And that data pool then. So for residential, I think that it's working. I think the commercial sector yet has probably further to go with regards to accessibility in relation to values, sale values anyway. Certainly lease values, you can see, with the commercial property price register, there is access there to limited types of data. But I see this going forward over the next several years that, that is going to expand. It'll become more transparent in the marketplace. And it'll be, it's definitely a tool that valuers, in relation to what To Go was doing, can access. They're utilizing it very well. And there's various commercial products, I suppose, that are out in the marketplace that are allowing valuers to get access to this data. And you can see this happening in other European countries. So they're using, some of them are looking at Ireland as the type of model that's being used, and that is being activated, or it's been spun up into other industry sectors. Like, just taking you back, probably, I'm thinking maybe 20 years ago, there was a commercial, in Malaysia. So they actually had a database of property values, but that was government-based linked. So you could access, now this is going back 20 years ago, you could access data with regards to property transactions in that particular country at that time, whereas we were still working off, whatever was stamped in the land registry, and the only people that had access to that at the time was probably revenue.
Yeah.
So things have changed and moved and quite a lot, and so you can see that the access to more data is going to be more transparent within the marketplace. And if you look at residential, I think it's been good for residential. It's been positive. Certainly the buying public, are more informed now than they would have been years ago with regards to buying a property in a specific area.
Do you think, in terms of the, residential has powered ahead because there's simply a greater number of players in the market, whereas for commercial, we have a small number of quite big agencies that deal with a lot. So actually, the information doesn't have far to travel. Ireland is a small country, so and there are really only a handful of very large agencies dealing with this. But you mentioned there, in terms of, say, Malaysia, that was state information. So there's kind of a state system that needs to be put in place, maybe with the private sector feeding into it. One of the really interesting ways that I've seen this kind of built out was Sharon McGee, Director of Rating Policy in the Land and Property Services, gave an overview as to how Land and Property Services were brought together, kind of essentially from three quite disparate groups and sets of data. And I don't think they're fully there yet, but they're essentially collaborating, bringing those three pools of data together into one comprehensive service, and the technology that underpins that. Do you think, is the industry aware of the role that technology has to play, and do you think the industry is open to it?
Yeah, I suppose, I think definitely, I think the industry is open to it. Again, when you look, the industry will come at it from the point of view, let's say valuations, where you've got AI possibly coming into play, where, there's these desktop valuations that are being carried out, opinions of value being given, but it doesn't replace, at the end of the day, an individual being on the ground, physically actually inspecting a building, taking their notes, giving their opinion, getting a feel for what's actually happening on the ground itself. I mean, it's quite easy to look at data and make an assumption with regards to a property value, gathering specific data together. But that doesn't mitigate the fact that you're going to have somebody actually put eyes on it, inspect the property. There could be all sorts of, just as an example, if you take a rural property where the septic tank might be in a neighbouring property, but nobody's being made aware of that until there's actually somebody on site and establishes that a septic tank is not inside the boundaries of a property, and next thing there's an easement required in order for it to be to qualify for clear title. So, I mean, I'm just using that as a very simple and basic example. But yes, there's technology there. It's being gathered together, where the data is being pooled from various sources coming together. But it depends on what that is actually going to be used for. Is it being used by, let's say, a valuer to compare their notes on what they've seen based on what it is, and how much of that information? I'm purely talking here from a residential point of view more so than a commercial. So if you take it a residential property that's been valued, and if they're using sort of blue book standards, there's plenty of touch points within that valuation report that have to meet the criteria of the valuer, the lending institution, to be able to qualify the value of the property. So just looking at data alone and accumulating data doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to give you the figure at the end of the day.
Actually, I think that's a great point. And Professor Nick French certainly made that point, not just this year, but I remember him making the same point last year, as in the industry, the valuers need to really step into their role, and their role with rising technology and greater access to data. Their role is really going to be interpreting that data, putting context around it. And one of the things that I was quite surprised to hear him say was to be sure to add sentiment, their opinion to this, because I suppose I come from the background where I'm an advocate for data, and I think that reveals a lot. So, but it was a very important point he made, and it shouldn't have surprised me, but it did, to say to valuers, actually take the data, analyze it, interpret it, and record that, but then add your sentiment.
Yeah, and it was a point that really jumped out at me, because it's like, and I've seen it time and time again, where a valuer in their own head is knows what's going on. They mightn't be translating that actually onto paper. They'll be putting down the stats and the figures and all the rest. But again, as you say, the sentiment and their thoughts, with regards to how they're actually arriving at that, whether that's commercial or residential, and more so with commercial, I would say, what's the sentiment on the particular street, on an investment property or a retail property that they're valuing. Why are they arriving at that particular field? We know, because of it's that specific yield, but what are the positives and negatives with regards to the demand for a specific type of property, particularly in a challenging market where there mightn't be comparables available to you. So it's getting those thoughts down on paper and putting them across, because there was talk as well where valuers might feel, well, they might be exposing themselves to whatever, or whether that's criticism, or whether it's to something that they feel they may have stepped outside of the boundaries of what they're actually required to do. But in the same breath, I would say that if it's within the confines of what you're actually being asked to value, you put your sentiments and thoughts down around that. No, not everybody's going to agree with the valuation figure at the end of the day.
Paul, one of the things that stood out for me on the day when you gave an opening address, and I'm a great fan of clear communication, and I think at one point you just urged the industry, don't write down rubbish, and I thought, okay, well, that's it. That's the key takeaway for today. Don't write down rubbish. Yeah. Do you want to explain that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, and again, it's you read some reports and it's waffle. If you're putting a very structured, detailed blue book to go over report, whether and particularly from a commercial sense, you have to have your facts, you have to have your figures. If you're giving sentiment and you're giving your thoughts there, make sure that they're specific. That they're specific to the task that's required. They're specific to the type of property that you're actually valuing. And that's so important, because you've got to think on the other side of the fence, the person that's receiving that report, how they're actually perceiving it, how they're reading it. You're taking them through a process. So you've got obviously your commentary headline, your headliners at the start, but you're taking them through, it's almost like telling a story. But at the end of that story, there's a finale, and they understand the report, they understand the process and you're taking them through the report, and then how you arrived at that conclusion. Okay. And I think if you do it in that process, again, and I suppose maybe don't write rubbish. It might sound harsh, but I've come across plenty of reports in my day where, the only place they should be is in a bin.
Okay. Well, one of the things we've seen is there's a little bit of a covering technique happening there, giving an opinion and hope that you won't be called on it. So therefore you qualify it within within an inch of its life and beyond usefulness. Okay, finally, before we finish up, so again, the conference that was held last week, you know, it was a European-wide valuation conference, and the theme was a practical approach to valuation in a post-pandemic economy. Before we finish up, Paul, what's the final takeaway as president of IPAV? What's the final takeaway you want valuers to have in terms of a practical approach to valuation in a post-pandemic economy?
Yeah, well, I again, I think it's whether it's prior or post. I mean, look, in any valuer that's going out to do any report, it's, you know, the time is taken up doing your research. You know, actually going out and inspecting the building, measuring it up, doing all that, that's the easy bit. You know, your work really starts and then actually going out and researching within the field of the property that you're valuing, and gathering that data, analyzing that data, making your assumptions and airing your views and putting your thoughts together. So it creates a full structured report that's at the level and standards that's required by Takova and IPAV, and that will be recognized, you know, as a world leading report if it's in the commercial or residential sector. So when you actually put something to paper, it's delivered to whoever has appointed you to deliver that report, that it looks professional and it's at the standards and levels that it should be at, to be recognized by Takova, IPAV and the lending institutions throughout Europe.
Okay, I think that's a good note to finish on. Thank you so much. That was Paul McCourtney, President of IPAV. Thank you again for joining us today. We need to take a quick break. Stay tuned.